Good evening, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to another Sunday Live Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about productivity, some of the productivity expectations in different settings, as well as avoiding working off the clock as a travel therapist. This is something at least once a week we get a question or comment from a new traveler or a current traveler talking about their contract and how things are going and how they avoid being pressured to work off the clock. That's a common thing for travelers to encounter. So we want to talk a little bit about that. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we're going to jump right in.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we run the website Travel Therapy Mentor. We also have a personal blog called Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist. And many of you may know us from these two sites. Some of you guys may have joined us on previous videos that we've done. We try to do them every week on various travel therapy topics. And we also write a lot of articles for our website, Travel Therapy Mentor, and you can find those on our website and on our Facebook page, giving you guys information and education about different travel therapy issues. So as Jared mentioned, tonight we want to talk a little bit about productivity, which is a dreaded word in healthcare, and it's something that we all face as healthcare providers, travelers and non-travelers. But it can be sometimes more difficult for a traveler because we're coming into new situations all the time and we're only there a short period. And sometimes the expectation might be that the traveler maintains the same or sometimes higher productivity requirements than the permanent staff. And this can be challenging when you're first getting to learn the new system and you've just arrived in a new place. So again, we'll kind of talk a little bit about this tonight. We would love some feedback from you guys that are watching, whether you're watching us live or you're watching later on the replay. We'd love if you would leave us a comment and let us know who you are. I know we often have current travelers on here, current permanent therapists that are thinking about doing travel, and also current students that are thinking about doing travel. So if you guys would just drop us a comment and say hello and tell us who you are. And Jared's getting our videos shared in a couple of groups so that some more people can join on with us live tonight. So hi Ryan, thanks for joining us. Ryan's making jokes about Jared's shirt. Typical, we can always count on Ryan for some humor in our videos. So if anybody else is joining on, I see a few more of you guys are signing on. We'd love if you'd say hello in the comments and let us know who you are. So we'll jump into tonight's topic, which is productivity issues for the travel therapist and our recommendations for avoiding working off the clock as a traveler.
Yeah, so I think the common misconception, at least we think it's a misconception in our experience, each working about 4.5 years, that's a combined total of, 9 years of being a travel therapist. We have never been, the so-called workhorses that a lot of people think that travel therapists should be or are expected to be. And if anything, we have had a lighter caseload or an easier schedule than most of the permanent staff. And I think the misconception about that, or the idea that the travelers is going to be like the workhorse that has to work a lot, is based on the fact that we get paid higher as a travel therapist. And that is, that's true, but that does not mean that we're getting paid more in order to work more hours or see more patients. The reason we get paid more is because we have to maintain two dwellings. We have to maintain a tax home and a home wherever we're working. And in addition to that, we have to move from place to place, and we have uncertainty with our job. So that's why we get paid more. It's not we get paid more so that we see a lot of patients and we get treated a lot worse than the permanent staff.
Yeah, that's a huge thing to consider. So we are filling a need for them. We're coming in and supplying them with therapists where they otherwise wouldn't have one because they might have a shortage of staff for one reason or another. So we're really there to provide a service, and we are willing to pick up and move and go in order to get there in time for their short-term need, because often these jobs, it's like ASAP. We need somebody yesterday. We need you next week. We need you right now. So we're coming in and filling that gap. So there is often this pressure to feel like, oh my gosh, they're paying me so much more than the permanent staff. I need to work really hard, even if that means I need to work off the clock. But we want to talk about tonight to try to break this stigma and this habit to help our fellow travel therapists so that you guys don't make some of the mistakes that we've seen other people making and get taken advantage of.
Yeah, as a travel therapist, you should never feel like you have to do more work or you should have to work off the clock because you're getting paid more. Because, like I said, those are not the reasons why we're getting paid more.
I see a few new people are signing on. Hey, Sophia, thank you for joining us tonight. If anybody else is watching live, we would love to hear from you in the comments. If you would just say hello and say what your discipline is, if you're a current traveler, if you're a permanent therapist thinking about doing traveling, or if you are a student, we would love to hear from you to kind of see who our audience is. And then we're going to ask for some feedback also on what y'all's experience has been with this, with productivity issues, because I know that everyone has probably faced this one time or another. Hey Jeff, thanks for joining. Whether you're a permanent therapist or whether you're a travel therapist, I'm sure you've run into productivity issues or having a talking to by the manager or feeling pressure to work off the clock one way or the other.
I didn't see Ryan was talking about my traps, man.
So like we have kind of alluded to, we think it's very important that you guys avoid working off the clock.
Yeah, I mean, not only is it's not best for you, it's going to lead to burnout and things like that, but the other thing is it's illegal to work off the clock. As travelers, we are hourly employees, and I think this is one thing that you get into a clinic and some managers don't realize how travelers work, because you have to remember some of these clinics and managers have never worked with a traveler before. And put yourself in their position. Say they have a whole staff full of salaried employees, and all the salaried employees just work as long as they need to get the job done, right? And it's not uncommon for salaried employees to work 42, 45 hours a week. And that's completely fine. That's kind of what you sign up for as a salaried employee. You work however many visits to get the job done, do the documentation and all that. As an hourly employee, on the other hand, you have to be clocked in for the hours that you're working. So from the manager's perspective, if they have a staff full of salaried employees and they have a traveler come in, they would expect the traveler to do the same thing. In some cases, travelers move from clinic to clinic, so a lot of times we are faster than the permanent staff. That's at least what we found. So I can usually get things done quicker than the permanent staff once I get acquainted with the clinic. So there are situations where the permanent staff might work 42, 45 hours and I can get it done in 40. But if it takes me 42 or 45 hours, I need to write that on my timesheet, because when I clock in is when my time starts. When I clock out is when my time's up. And that includes everything. That includes patient time, documentation, everything. So we should never be doing work off the clock.
Yeah. Hey Mitch, thanks for joining us. Mitch says that he is currently on his second contract as a travel PT. Mitch, what has been your experience with this? Have you run into any productivity issues or pressure to work off the clock in your couple of contracts?
Hey Matt.
Hey Matt, thanks for joining. Unfortunately, we do get pressured into some of these situations, and we've had it happen before. We want to get into talking a little bit about some different settings. But one thing I want to talk about is standing up for yourself from the beginning of a contract. So we recently have heard from a couple people that sort of got about halfway through their contract and they were realizing that they were kind of spending extra hours to get their documentation done at the end of the day, and they didn't realize they should be getting paid for that time. But now it's kind of, at that point, it's kind of too late because you didn't say anything about it in the beginning. So we always encourage you to get ahead of this right at the beginning. If you find that your first week or so, now I do give it a little leniency in the very first week because there is a huge learning curve when you're coming in that first week. But on the other side of that is they should be appropriately ramping up your caseload so that that doesn't happen on the first week. So if I work over a little bit the first week, I don't necessarily put it down if it's, 10, 15, 20 minutes here or there just to wrap up my notes at the end of the day. But if by the second week you're seeing that the number of patients they're putting on your schedule is exceeding what you're capable of doing and the allotted hours that you're supposed to work, you need to, there's a couple of different ways you can approach it. Go to your manager and say, look, the amount of patients that I'm scheduled, I can't complete that in my 40 hours. It's causing me to go into overtime. Are you okay with me getting overtime, or is there something we can do to adjust my caseload? Or sometimes what we've had happen is we would just work the overtime, put the hours down, and then see what happens when we turn in our time sheet for that week.
Yeah, there are some clinics that don't care at all about overtime, and they're willing to pay that if you need the time to finish your documentation or to see extra patients or whatever it is that's causing you to work overtime. There's some clinics that are completely fine with that. My first job ever, I worked a ton of overtime and they had no issue with it. As long as I was seeing patients and I was getting my documentation done, they let me, work as many hours as I need to. So on my timesheet, I just wrote my in and out time, and I would have on average maybe 4 or 5 hours of overtime per week, and that was no big deal. But there are other clinics where that is a huge deal, and if you get even 15 minutes of overtime, they'll make a big deal about it. And what Whitney was talking about with the recent travelers, we've had probably 4 or 5 recent travelers talking about being pressured into, it's not so much that they're being pressured, they're just having a workload or a caseload that's so high that they can't get it done in 40 hours. And a lot of times this is with new grads that go in a clinic and they're already nervous about starting their profession, starting their careers as new grads. And they see everyone else in the clinic staying extra and working late. And like I mentioned before, a lot of times those are salaried employees that are not getting paid overtime. They're just working however long they need to get the job done. And then they come in and they end up working 42 or 43 hours, but they feel bad about writing that on their sheet because that was documentation time. And there's this weird idea that I've seen in some groups and things, and I think this is usually promoted by managers or clinic owners, that documentation time isn't productive time. And that doesn't make any sense. I mean,
That's crazy.
It's a vital part of our job. You don't get paid if you don't do the documentation. So yeah, that's part of the job. That's part of productivity. So these new travelers, these new grads, will go into that clinic situation, and they'll start out by feeling bad because they're not as fast as everyone else, and they start working a couple hours off the clock. But then before you know it, it's 6 weeks into your contract. You're still working a couple hours off the clock. But then how do you bring that up?
Right.
So yes, from the very beginning, you have to stand up for yourself. And as I mentioned in prior videos, if any of you guys will watch those, what I will do, like Whitney said, is I'll just write the overtime on my sheet. And then if the manager has a problem with that, then they will talk to me about it. And I can explain, okay, so, right now my caseload is too high for me to see all the patients and get the documentation done. So if you guys aren't willing to pay overtime, then we need to adjust my schedule somehow, because all I do is I record my in and out time. I'm as efficient as I possibly can be. And if I can't finish it in 40 hours, then that's going to be overtime. So in that situation, I've never had a situation where the manager wasn't somehow understanding of that. They would either reduce my caseload or increase my, basically give me documentation time, or something like allow me to get overtime. I mean, there's different options there, but almost always the manager's going to work with you because they don't want to bring a new traveler in or something like that. And a lot of times once you explain to them you're an hourly employee and you're not allowed to work off the clock, they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm used to salaried employees, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, and I want to bring up, again, about the new grad issue. A lot of times when the new grads get into the situation, they feel like it's just them. They're just slow, and it's their fault because they're a new grad and they're still learning, and they realize, oh, maybe I'm just slower than if I had more experience. So they feel like it's their fault, it's on them, so they should stay late to get it done. Well, there is some truth to that, but the thing is, when you had an interview and the manager agreed to hire you, the manager knew that you were a new grad. They knew that there was going to be some ramp-up period. They knew that you weren't maybe going to be as efficient as someone who is a tenured, experienced therapist. So there's a give and take there. They still needed you there. They still agreed to have you come there. They can't abuse you as an employee. So you still shouldn't feel bad about the situation. They need to work with you in the situation. And now a lot of therapists will have a fear that their contract is going to get canceled because they can't maintain productivity. This is a valid concern, but we, in our experience, and I think we are a little bit biased, being that PTs are a little bit more in high demand than some other disciplines. We've never ever had a contract canceled for not meeting the productivity, and we have certainly had a talking to many a times about productivity and many issues where it was like, no, what you're putting on our caseload is not realistic for a 40-hour work week. Either we're going to get overtime or you're going to cut back our patients. And we said this in a non-confrontational way, but one way or the other, there was a conversation that was had, and it was fine.
Yeah, and this it's not something that's rare. These conversations with managers about either getting overtime or reducing your caseload, this happens very, very commonly, either in outpatient or skilled nursing especially. And the reason for that is sometimes skilled nursing has unrealistic expectations. We'll get into that more. Or outpatient, they, like I said, they kind of expect you to do the documentation outside of that 40 hours, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. So I will say that I know that some other disciplines, for example, assistants or maybe OTs, where the market isn't as in demand for those therapists, there's a higher number of therapists than there are supply of jobs. Yes, there is a little bit more of a risk of your contract getting canceled for issues like this, and we do understand that. PTs and SLPs are more in a high demand, so they're like, we've worked so many places where we were the only PT on site, and we maybe supervised a bunch of PTAs, and they were not willing to get rid of us. They wanted to work with us and keep us there at all costs.
Yeah.
So I do understand you might be in a little trickier of a situation if you're in a lower demand discipline, but you still have to stand up for yourself because ultimately it is your license. There are legal and ethical guidelines, and you need to not be abused as an employee.
Yep.
So I want to go through a couple comments here, and then we'll go into the next part of the video where we talk about the different settings.
Mitch says, I have made it a point to get all my work done. I do finish a few of my notes on lunch, sometimes with never exceeding 15 minutes. Yeah, I mean, I think I think 15 minutes or so is not a huge deal, especially if it's during lunch or whatever. I personally do not do that. Whitney does that sometimes, but I mean, yeah, if it's not a huge amount, an hour, at least an hour a week, I mean, it's probably not a huge deal.
Yeah, that's kind of how I look at it, Mitch. Is like, if it's a few minutes here or there, okay, maybe I could have been a little more efficient. Maybe I didn't need to sit there and chat with that patient for that extra time, or chat with my coworker, and I should have been getting my notes done. Okay, maybe a little bit of it was my fault. Like, I'll do 15 minutes here or there. But if it turns into an hour or more a week, okay, then we have problems.
Yeah, Matt said, I've definitely had pressure to maintain my productivity percentage. Yeah, I think not only travelers, but probably every therapist out there has had pressure to maintain productivity at some point, because that's such a huge point of contention in the therapy world now between therapists and rehab managers and owners, because obviously that's how they bring in revenue, is how much we bill, how productive we are. But we don't want our lives to be miserable, and there's situations that come up where you can't always be as productive as you know, the guidelines say.
David says, this is literally happening to me this upcoming week. David, we'd love to hear more about your story. What setting are you in? What issues are you facing? With that said, we want to go into talking about what we've seen in different settings. So what might be some typical expectations you might see for productivity in certain settings, and some scenarios you might encounter with how they might try to take advantage of you or whatnot. With that said, if anybody's watching, if you wouldn't mind just telling us, what setting are you currently working in, and what is the productivity requirement, or how is that measured at your current setting? For example, if you're an outpatient, how many patients an hour or a day are you supposed to see? Is it measured on a weekly basis? If you're in skilled nursing or acute, is it a percentage basis? If you're in home health, tell us, are you supposed to be a certain number of points or visits per week? Let us know in the comments what you guys are seeing out there.
Yeah, so we'll start with outpatient. That's what we are mostly have worked in. I've worked all my contracts except for 2 in outpatient, so I'm very familiar there. In general, so kind of what sparked this whole video is that I saw a post talking about how travel therapists are kind of meant to be workhorses, and I wanted to talk about that. But another thing was, I saw another traveler that said that she had been treated as kind of a workhorse as a travel therapist. And, she said that she had to see a lot of patients, mostly outpatient per day. For us, we generally take contracts where we're seeing between 8 and 12 patients a day in outpatient. And that's usually 8 to 12 scheduled per day, which ends up being that you probably see 8 to 10 actually per day after, 1 or 2 cancellations. The busiest outpatient clinic I've been in, I think I maybe averaged 14 a day. I would maybe have 18 scheduled and see 14, but that was a situation that I probably wouldn't have accepted the job, except that Whitney already had a job in that area. So for the most part, outpatient jobs as a travel therapist, as long as you're selective about the locations you go to, you ask the right questions in the interview, which we've made several videos about this in the past, you can avoid those really high volume outpatient clinics. They're out there, and they need travelers, of course, because not a lot of permanent therapists want to work there, but you don't have to take those jobs. And in our experience, we've had very, very little trouble finding good outpatient clinics to work in.
Yeah. Like Jared said, we love the clinics where it's 8 to 12 patients a day. Right now, the clinic I'm at an outpatient is just so cushy and so amazing. It's 45 minutes one-on-one with every single patient. So the max number of patients I have to see in an 8-hour day is 11. And most of the time I see 8 to 10. It's really great.
And this is a high-paying job in a low cost of living area. It's like the ideal job. This is what we always look for.
But I would say the majority of the clinics we work at would have like 12 to 14 slots slotted out, as long as you didn't double book. We have had a couple clinics where with those 12 to 14 slots, they were wanting us to double book sometimes, which put us up in the 15, 16 range, but usually with cancellations it evened out. We have heard of people with the expectation of like 15 to 20 patients a day. In our opinion, that's way too much. So we really ask very detailed questions during our outpatient interviews to find out how the scheduling is. A very common pattern we'll see is our evals, 30 minutes overlapping treatments.
Yeah, that's exactly what Mitch said. So that 30-minute treatments, Mitch, is that overlapping? So you're expected to see the patient for an hour? That's usually what we see, or is it actually 30-minute treatments?
But you also need to ask about double books, because this 1-hour eval, 30-minute overlapping treatments can be a very reasonable schedule if you have techs to help you. But if you're also expected to double book and overlap, you could end up having 3 to 4 patients at a time, which is not very realistic and could really push the ethics of how you can deliver your treatment. So this is the way that we see in outpatient. that they're really pushing the limits is by having you overlap and sometimes double book, which, depending on the patient population and the type of documentation system, may make it unrealistic to get your notes done. So if you ask these questions and you're finding out, oh wow, you do overlap and you do double book, well, how are your other therapists able to get their notes done in time? Do they have techs that can help them? Is it a primarily Medicare population or not? Are they pretty independent? Because if you have a bunch of athletes, a bunch of high school students and things like that, and they're pretty independent, and you can kind of say, okay, remember that exercise that we did last time? Okay, do that one, and then after that, do that one, and then you have 5 minutes to catch up on your notes real quick. That's more realistic than if you're having a lot of hands-on, one-on-one Medicare patients that you don't have any time to get your notes done.
Yeah, so in our experience, we have seen some clinics, we have worked in some clinics that are 45 minutes or an hour one-on-one, but the majority are going to be an hour evals with 30-minute overlapping patients, and pretty much the clinic's expecting you to see each person for 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes more than that, but averaging 3 to 4 units. I think that's probably the most common travel outpatient job, probably the most common outpatient job in general, has those kind of requirements. And I think that's reasonable as long as you have a little bit of help. You have a clinic that has, a pretty decent population in terms of patients aren't needing too much assistance all the time. I think you can do that. But yeah, we prefer the clinics that are one-on-one, but sometimes they can be hard to come by.
Some other things, some interviews that we've heard are taken and turned down were like if they said 30 minutes all across the board, including 30-minute evals. We tend to turn those down because yes, in a lot of cases I can get an evaluation done in 30 minutes, but if the patient's any bit late doing their paperwork, you're going to get really screwed, and you're certainly not going to have any time to type your evals. So we turn down jobs that say 30-minute evals or less. We turn down jobs that say that it's mandatory that you double book a lot. If they say rarely you might have to double book at your discretion, okay, that's reasonable. But if they say mandatory double books, nope. Also, what was the last thing I was thinking of? The double books and I lost it.
Well, we can talk about one thing I wanted to mention in outpatient is we have heard some horror stories for sure. So like I said, that one traveler was saying she was treated as a workhorse. But it gets very bad in terms of some outpatient jobs. And I think some clinics really try to take advantage of travelers. And that's why you have to ask the right questions in the interview, ask about, what is the schedule like, what's productivity like, and all that. But we've actually heard of a situation where a travel therapist was expected to see 4 evals in an hour.
It didn't make any sense. It made no sense.
Yeah, so there would be some days where this traveler would have 20 evals scheduled in a day.
That's what I couldn't remember is how many evals per day. That's a good question to ask.
So it gets ridiculous, and you have to avoid those jobs completely, and make sure you ask the right questions. And if you get in there and say they lied about it, get out of there as soon as possible, because those are terrible jobs. And any traveler taking jobs like that is gonna think, oh wow, travelers are really abused and taken advantage of, and travel therapy is not really a good way to go. But if you had the experience that we had, where we're going to these really pretty easy clinics, I would say, and actually getting lower caseloads than the permanent staff, traveling is great and it's been wonderful. So.
Okay, so that's a little bit about outpatient. So next we're going to talk about skilled nursing. So we had a couple comments about skilled nursing. Skilled nursing facilities are usually, the productivity is usually measured on a percent basis, which if any of you guys have worked in skilled nursing before, you understand how this works. They need you to be productive a certain percent of the minutes or hours that you're there that day. So if the productivity is 90%, that means if you're in the building for 8 hours, 90% of that amount of time, which whatever that turns out to be 7 hours and whatever, you have to be billing for a patient.
Directly with the patient. Which
in our opinion is absurd if you are an evaluating therapist. We don't think that 90% or above is realistic for an evaluating therapist.
There are situations, so I will say, there are situations where the clinic can be set up, or the skilled nursing facility can be set up perfectly, where you have like a cart where you can type the eval while you're with the patient, and you have an aide that goes and gets the patient and brings them to the gym, and you have a schedule set up for the patients where you're not trying to track them down, where that is possible. But I would say 99.5% of skilled nursing clinic or facilities are not that way.
Yeah.
So 90% when you're trying to document evals, you're trying to chase down patients, you're trying to go to the room to get the patient, transport them to the gym.
Work around meal times, work around other disciplines, work around nursing, etc. it's just not realistic. Every clinic, every facility I've ever been in as a travel therapist in a skilled nursing facility has been just an absolute mess in terms of the way that it's scheduled and the way that it's set up. I mean, everything from, I worked at one place where we did paper documentation and then we did computer billing on ancient desktop computers that you had to only be inside the office to use, obviously not at the patient's bedside to be able to type point of service. I've worked at one where you only got internet. You had a laptop, but you only got internet in the gym, so you could only type in there. You couldn't type in the rooms.
Yeah. We worked at one where we had like probably 6 or 7 therapists and only 2 laptops to use. So there's just a lot of really unrealistic expectations in the skilled nursing world. We would say that the majority, what we would think is realistic for an evaluating therapist, a PT, an OT, or a speech therapist, is going to be 75 to 85% productivity in a skilled nursing facility. Yes, do we think that sometimes you can meet 85% or above if all the stars align? Okay. So if you run into the majority of the interviews you're going to see where they say, 90% or 85%. This is when we like to have a conversation during the interview of, okay, great. If everything goes well, that's fine. But what about if I have a week where I have a lot of evaluations and discharges to type? What if I have a lot of supervisory responsibilities with my assistants? Yeah.
These types of questions. And you need to get a feel for how reasonable the manager is, because otherwise you're going to get put in a bad situation where these productivity issues are going to become a problem.
Yeah, so one question that I think is probably one of the most telling you can ask is, okay, so 90% is the requirement or 85% is the requirement. What happens if I have a day where I have 3 non-visit discharges because 3 patients went to the hospital, or they were discharged but they were seen by a PTA and I have to write the discharge? I can't bill for any of that time, so how do you handle that? And then based on their answer there, you can kind of determine, is this going to be somewhere that I might actually want to go to or not? Because sometimes they'll just try to brush that off. Oh, that doesn't happen. Yes, it happens. We all know that happens, and you can't bill for that time, and that's 15 or 20 minutes sometimes by the time you get on the computer, review notes, write the discharge, and that's non-billable time. So that would be your whole non-billable portion of your day sometimes. So ask those questions.
Yeah, and so from what I understand now that there's been a lot of changes with PDPM is a lot of facilities are bringing back concurrent and group therapy treatments, which actually enables your productivity to be higher. So some of them are actually having productivity expectations over 90 or 95%. In some cases over 100%, because you can actually be over 100% productive if you have a group of individuals several times a day, each day of the week. So these guidelines are changing a little bit. If you find out it's a facility where they're going to be doing a lot of group treatments, yes, the productivity could be a little bit higher, but still we would stray away from those 90% or above if possible. And make sure to ask a lot of questions during your interview so that you don't walk into a bad situation.
Yeah, for sure.
For assistants, however, you maybe could get by with a little higher productivity because you don't have to write as many of these long reports like the evaluation, the progress, and the discharge notes.
Yeah, 90% for an assistant might really be feasible. I mean, it's not easy by any means, but it might be feasible. But we have seen some jobs where assistants are expected to get like 95% or 97.5%, which is ridiculous.
It's crazy. So we got a little bit of feedback here. Armand says he's a PTA working in a SNF. We try to hit 95%. Groups tend to push us over that quite often, yes. So
yeah,
that's
so
kind of
groups
what we're talking
definitely make
about.
a difference.
So that's kind of doable when you're an assistant who's doing the treatments and you do get to group patients. But again, back when we talked about with our PDPM, don't feel pressured just to group patients just because your rehab director tells you to. You need to make sure they're appropriate for a group and use your clinical knowledge.
Definitely treat the patient and don't treat based on what the facility wants you to do.
Hannah says SLP at a SNF. Minimum for the evaluating therapist is 90%. The DOR totals on Friday that our group productivity for PT, OT, and SLP is now 103%.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So Hannah, I'm interested, how do they separate it out? Like if you have a certain productivity that you meet when you have a group,
I'm sure that's probably total productivity is now supposed to be 103% because of having groups.
That seems absurd to me.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So we need to stand up for ourselves and just do what is realistic and don't feel pressured to. I can really tell you situations where it was like literally at the dot, people are clocking out and then sitting there for another 2 hours typing notes off the clock.
Yeah.
In SNFs. I've seen it happen. Please don't let that be you. Stand up for yourself.
It's bad for everybody.
If it's not realistic, don't do it. It's actually illegal. Like a lot of these EMRs now will prompt you and say like it's illegal for you to be here at work in the building billing and documenting when it says that you clocked out.
People
and
still
left.
do it though. They'll just lie about it and still document.
It'll ask you, it'll prompt you to say like yes or no, and people will lie, click the button, and just keep on going.
Yep, that's permanent staff too. That's not just travelers.
Oh, and the other really crazy thing that we see some people in SNFs do is if they can't get a patient, they'll sit there in the hallway and clock out for a little while so their productivity numbers will look better. But then it's like you're sitting there at work and you can't leave because you still have patients to see.
Yeah.
And you're clocked out. It's craziness.
Yeah, we worked at, the only skilled nursing I've ever worked at, actually, was a travel job. And I would say some of the assistants would be there 9 or more hours in a day, but only be clocked in for 8 of that because they clock out when they can't get patients, so their productivity looks better. And that's ridiculous. I mean, all of that is part of our job. If you can't get a patient, that's not your fault. And you should never be off the clock at work. That doesn't make any sense.
It's awful. And what it's doing is it's making it hard for people that like us and like those of you that are watching that stand up for yourself to keep those jobs. And I've honestly had some assistants express this to me. They're like, you know what, Whitney, if I don't do it, they'll fire me and they'll get a PTA that will.
And that's usually permanent staff because they're stuck. I mean, say there's only 1 or 2 skilled nursing facilities in your whole town, and you don't have a lot of options there. So if there's a supply there of PTAs that will take that job, a lot of them feel forced to work off the clock, which is terrible, but I can also understand that. And, you know, we've definitely been in situations where I feel very bad for the permanent staff, and I'm glad that I'm not a permanent employee there.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of what we're seeing in skilled nursing and how some directors will abuse the system and put you in tough situations as a traveler. So again, just to reinforce this idea of standing up for yourself, try not to work off the clock, have these candid conversations with your director and tell them, you know, look, this, at one point in my career at one of my skilled nursing facility jobs, I actually wrote down an account for every like minute and hour that I was doing something and explained to them, look, I had this patient that was a max assist transfer. I couldn't document the evaluation or the progress report until afterwards. So I'm sitting here at the laptop in the office doing this for 30 minutes. Okay, there's your productivity time.
Yeah.
What would you do in this situation? How can I better?
Yeah, and usually
do this,
if you go to a DR and you confront them about that situation, you say like, this is why I can't be productive. Sometimes, so this is something really ridiculous. We're getting off on a tangent about SNFs, but something really ridiculous is one of the SNFs that we were at, they didn't count evaluation time in the productivity. You would get a maximum of, I think it was like, no, I don't think it counted at all. Remember that?
I think 15 maybe.
Maybe 15 minutes, but it might have been that the eval didn't count at all towards your productivity. So then if you have one eval, not even including the documentation, but the actual evaluation part, like assessing the patient, didn't count towards your productivity. How does that make sense?
So what they encouraged you to do was only put down 15 minutes that you evaluated the patient, and the rest of your, maybe you spent an hour with that new patient that first day, bill 15 as the eval and bill 45 as the treatment. Well, no,
Yeah.
maybe 30 of it was the eval. You can't tell me how much of it was the eval.
Yeah.
I'm the only one.
So you got to
who
stand
can-
up for yourself in those
who can
situations.
determine that.
Another bad thing that happened at that skilled nursing facility was that your meetings wouldn't count towards your productivity. So there was mandatory meetings every week, but that didn't count towards your productivity. So how can you have a 30-minute meeting that doesn't count towards your 90% expectation and expect you to hit the productivity for that day?
The some of this is that you
Some of
need
it's
to be
ridiculous.
you need to be realistic and you need to think, this doesn't make sense. I need to stand up for myself. Why am I just living in La La Land where the rest of these people are just letting the DOR walk on them because they don't want to lose their job? No, I'm not going to let that be me. You guys need to stand up for yourself and realize if you have to walk away from that job, it means you have to walk away from that job. But
and as travelers, we are the perfect people to do that. And sometimes you can set a precedent there for everyone else and be like, hey, everyone, I'm only here temporarily. I'll stand up for myself. Why don't you guys also stand up for yourself and say, hey, this isn't realistic. Why are we having this meeting that doesn't count towards my productivity? Why am I having to clock out when I can't see patients? So hopefully we can be a voice of reason and maybe some change there, but doesn't always happen that way.
So Hannah says, regarding her prior comment saying that a lot of them are wanting to have 103% productivity now, she says, yes, this is the total productivity for all therapists that work there, based on the hours worked and billed hours. I'm at a solid 85 to 90%, and I do maybe one group a week because I don't feel it's appropriate. My manager has talked to me about it, but I just told her I'm going to track my exact minutes, and that's exactly what we suggest.
What we would do.
Hannah, is this a travel job? Because I really respect what you're doing, and I completely agree. And really, as a speech therapist, I don't know how you could do groups in most cases. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
PT, OT, maybe, but speech, why? Okay, we're getting a ton of comments about sniffs. We'll cover these real quick, and then we'll move on and talk about a couple other settings. So David said, outpatient also being asked to sign in at home to do notes. I noted that isn't how I want to spend my weekends and nights.
Yeah, it's tough because a lot of times the permanent staff will do that. And so you go in there and they kind of expect you to do that. Usually what I will start with is, oh yeah, that would be okay, but I don't have internet right now, which is easy for us because, we're going to new campgrounds and everything. So as a traveler, I'll just tell them, oh, well, I can't do that at home. At least for the first couple weeks, and use that as an excuse. And then once I set that precedent, then I'm not going to do it.
Well, and really that's him being non-confrontational.
Yeah.
Really what we should say is, oh, well, I'm an hourly employee, so I need to be clocked in to do my notes. I can't be clocked in from my couch unless you want to pay me to be at my couch. This is our couch.
I like
to our notes here.
I like to avoid the confrontation if I can, but
right.
That's an easy way to do it. But yeah, you should just say, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. So David, just say, no, I'm an hourly employee. I'm paid by the hour. I can't do my notes at home because I'm not clocked in. So that's what I would say in that situation. Armand said he also knows a CODA that would clock out and do all of her billing and notes off the clock.
We know a lot of CODAs and PTAs that will do that for sure.
Okay, last couple things about SNF before we move on to acute and home health. Jessica says, currently at a SNF, 90% productivity for evaluators. I'll say it's pretty well managed. The scheduled patient times, everyone has their own iPads, the texts are available, and the CNAs are really good. Wow.
That's
Jessica,
awesome.
Where's that SNF, if you don't mind telling us, because that sounds like the perfect SNF job.
Yeah, so in that
where
situation,
all the stars are aligned.
90% really might be realistic, but that is a very, very small percentage of skilled nursing in our experience.
Yes. Yeah, and then she says, as a follow-up to that, I've worked at some facilities that were 85% and never met the requirement because it was a hot mess. Most SNFs we've worked at as travelers have been the hot mess. I've only ever seen one, and I was there as a student when I was in school, that had what you're talking about. They had scheduled patient times, they had text to help, all of that. We were really well supported to meet that productivity. We had laptops available right there, point of service documentation. We didn't have a ton of low-level patients. We had a good mix of patients that were max assisted, not max assisted. We could actually, take our hands off the patient, safely let them sit there and do their exercise while we type, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Okay. Yes, Hannah, groups for speech are the worst, I would imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, yeah, we're getting ready to talk about acute care and home health, some of our experience there and requirements in terms of productivity. But there's 22 people in here right now. If you guys could please like or heart this video, the more engagement we get, the more people see the videos. It's always a great thing for us and for spreading information to other travelers and other therapists out there. And also, if any of you guys aren't commenting, let us know, what your experience is with this, because I know every therapist in here has some experience with productivity and some issues.
It's honestly the worst part of our profession. It's a necessary evil how our facilities get paid and how we in turn get paid. But there's definitely a lot of abuse that goes on. So I know you guys are feeling what we're saying here. So we appreciate the engagement. We appreciate the love when you guys can give us the thumbs up on the video.
So acute care. My very first contract ever was acute care. And acute care productivity is kind of weird in my experience because I've talked to a bunch of other therapists that have worked acute care as well. My acute care job was based on units, almost exactly like outpatient would be. Or, I guess outpatient. So my productivity, any unit I billed would be worth 15 minutes, and I was expected to try to get around 80%. It was almost like a mixture of outpatient and skilled nursing billing. But that seems to be very rare. Most acute care positions that I've talked to other therapists that they work in, they're expected to see a certain number of either evaluations or treatments per day, depending on whether they're evaluating therapist or a PTA or CODA. So a lot of times you might be expected to see five evaluations per day or 6 evaluations per day or 8 evaluations per day, depending on the hospital. And that seems to be the most common thing. But yeah, there's sometimes percentage based and sometimes it'll be based on units. So acute care varies a lot.
Yeah. We don't have a ton of experience in acute. I did some of my internships in acute, and then we've had some acute outpatient split. as travelers, when we've worked at these more rural hospitals where it's like acute outpatient split, it'll usually be you kind of just do acute when it's needed. Like, you're not the full-time acute person. You just sort of go there if you have cancellations just to help out, that sort of thing. In those situations, there really isn't productivity. It's just kind of like, well, we need you to see 1 or 2 patients to help out. If you don't have time to get it done, the regular acute care person will get it done. And in these situations, the census was usually pretty low because these were pretty rural hospitals. So I would say for the most part, like even the full-time therapist wasn't there a full 40 hours. So productivity issues weren't such a big deal there. Now, I imagine if you guys were at a bigger acute hospital, maybe a trauma center, level 1 trauma center or something like that, you might have more difficulty meeting your productivity expectations. So basically, it's going to be more or less that you have a list of patients you're supposed to see that day, and you try to get them all done within your 8-hour day.
Yeah.
Hopefully, in some situations here, if you're not able to get them all day, it could be a patient that could be pushed till the next day or pushed to another therapist. If not, again, if you're finding yourself staying late to try to get all of the patients done, or another alternative would have been cut the time short, because acute care treatments are often very quick. You could maybe, instead of doing a 30-minute treat, just do a 20-minute treat to get everything done and seen. You kind of have to play around with your efficiency. I remember back when I was a student trying to decide whether or not I would go see a bunch of patients in a row before coming back to type, because in most circumstances you're not doing point of service in acute care. You're usually coming back to the computer workstation after treating the patients. So is it going to be that you do documentation between patients throughout the day, or go do all your treatments for the morning, come back? Try to figure out how to manage your time. But again, just stand up for yourself. If you're finding out that they're asking you to see too many patients per day and it's making you be into overtime, just explain that to your manager and say, what do you want me to do in this situation?
And that seems to be pretty rare in terms of acute care. I think almost everyone that I've talked to in acute care, it's not really a huge deal about productivity like it is with outpatient and skilled nursing, because reimbursement is different. So usually managers are pretty lenient and willing to help there. So for acute care therapists, that's a great thing. And but yeah, still stand up for yourself. If for some reason it's not realistic, or there's some reason that you're not able to meet that requirement, then let the manager know and see if there's some kind of compromise or some kind of way to change things up so that it sets you up for success.
Yeah. If you're watching right now and you've taken an acute care assignment, or you're a current acute care therapist, please let us know if you're seeing something different than what we're saying. We'd love to get your feedback on that, because we don't have a lot of experience with acute care travel contracts.
All right. So home health. A lot of therapists now are doing home health. A lot of travel therapists, there's a lot of home health jobs. That could change with the PDGM that we talked about last week. Starting in January, there'll probably be a reduction in home health jobs. But right now, home health, there's a lot of jobs available, and they're also the highest paying. So a lot of travelers want to go that direction. You also get to avoid a lot of these productivity issues that we're talking about with outpatient and skilled nursing. So a lot of therapists from outpatient skilled nursing get fed up with productivity or seeing a lot of patients, and they go to home health, where you don't have as high requirements most of the time, and then you also have so much more autonomy in terms of being able to set up your schedule patients when you want them, set up your route, and what I haven't done a lot of home health, but what I would really enjoy about it is having that time between patients to just kind of decompress and be on my own, and not constantly being stimulated all the time like you would in a outpatient or a skilled nursing setting. So in terms of productivity in home health, most often what we see is a point system. And usually that will be something like 25 to 30 points required in a week. And what that means is the points are based on the type of visit. So treatment usually, so this is a common structure that we've seen. Treatment will be 1 point, a reassessment or a discharge will be 1.5 points, an evaluation would be 2 points, and a start of care would be 2.5 points. And so let's say you're seeing 25 points in a week, that's maximum, or basically an average of 5 points per day. So if you're doing 2 start of cares, that's your entire day right there, just those 2 visits. Whereas if you're doing 5 treatments, then you would have to do 5 to get those same points. So usually home health is going to be a point system.
Yeah. So this is very much going to depend on how efficient and fast you are with your documentation, because it could be very realistic if your driving radius is not too far, for you to get those 2 starter cares done in less than 8 hours. So you might be able to go and see both those starter cares and get your notes done and be in under 8 hours. And we've heard this in many cases with travel therapists, that they're actually not even really working a full 40 hours just to meet their points. And sometimes they're even getting over the points and not being a full 40 hours. But it could be vastly different if you are spread too thin as far as your region. We did one contract where we weren't full-time home health, but we were seeing home health visits in conjunction with our skilled nursing facility. So the same company did skilled nursing and home health, so sometimes we would go out and just do 1 or 2 a day, and it just kind of got worked into our skilled nursing productivity, so it was sort of weird. But then for a portion of that contract, they sent me to a different district. This was a hot mess. To go see home health kind of like full-time for them for a couple weeks. So this was my only experience with really seeing, this many like full-time home health. But I didn't really have a productivity as far as points go. They just said, can you try to see all these patients this week? I didn't know any better, so I was thinking like, 6 or 7 patients a day, that seems normal. But then the driving radius they were having me do was just absurd. So I ended up working these like 12-hour days with the notes and everything. So what I did was I just wrote down, because I was still an hourly employee basically in that contract, kind of like if I had been back at the skilled nursing facility. So I just wrote down my hours for the whole week, even if it took me a 12-hour day to get it done, and they still paid me. But I think that was a rare situation.
Yeah. We actually just this last week had a new traveler. I think they're experienced therapists, but they're getting into travel, and they had an offer for a job that was based on the visit for home health. One of the contracts was based on visit. And they were going to be expected, they were thinking about signing this contract. And if they had signed the contract, they were going to be expected to see 40 home health visits in a week, which is ridiculous. Like, anyone that's been in home health realizes that's ridiculous. But if you haven't been in home health, sometimes you can fool yourself into thinking that, I would just go right down the road, see that person for a while, drive a little further. But it's not that way. I mean, trying to schedule patients and trying to do documentation and drive time and all that, there's no way. So, yeah, five, maybe 6 patients in a day is pushing it. If you have any contract that's pay per visit and it's something absurd like seeing 8 patients in a day, avoid that contract.
Yeah, so that's some ways that we've seen and heard from others that home health kind of goes. So depending on your driving radius and all of that, and like how many starter cares you're having to do, it might be very reasonable. Some people love the flexibility and the productivity requirements that home health allows them, and some people choose to do like 10 points or 10 visits on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so they have a really easy Thursday, Friday, or whatever. Those contracts are amazing, but there are some contracts where you can be really abused. So you need to kind of do your research when you're presented as a travel therapist with a new region, because you may not know anything about that city or that region. So the best thing to do is use your resources in the travel therapy community, or if you happen to know somebody in that area, or try to ask the person who's interviewing you on the phone, well, what's that area like? What's the traffic like? Am I going to have to see this one county, or is it this whole metropolitan area that includes, 3 different cities? Like, if you had to do the whole Bay Area, I mean, that would just be absurd, because that's made up of like all these little cities in one area. It would have to be one small district because of the traffic. Versus where we did it in our region was really rural. So if it was 30 miles, it was 30 minutes, exactly on point. But you really need to kind of feel out the area, maybe Google map it, try out some different times, look at the statistics on Google Maps where it says like time of day when the traffic's a lot worse, it'll show you that. So just some things to think about when you're a travel therapist coming into these home health situations, to try to figure out if the productivity expectation is realistic or not.
Yep. So Matt said, met some travelers doing home health. Pretty interesting since everyone is out and about. Yeah, I think for travelers, it's really cool to do home health because you get to really explore that new area. And you don't have any work drama. You get to set up your own schedule. And also the thing about home health is the skills are very transferable from one location to another, which that's the case for any setting. But when you go to a new outpatient clinic, there's different equipment, there's different, coworkers, there's a lot of differences there. Whereas home health, you're always going into a person's house, no matter if it's in California or in Maine. It's still the same. You're going in their house, you're treating them the same. So I think, it's easier to get acquainted with a new home health contract. All you're really changing is the documentation system and the geography, learning the area.
Mm-hmm. Matt asks, is there any difference for a DC versus an Oasis DC for points? That I don't know. We don't have a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, I think there usually is. And so that was just a general we normally see the 1.5, 2.5, but there are some that will do like 1.25, 1.75, depending on, if it's oasis discharge and things like that. So there usually is some, it's all based on how long it should take you to get the visit done.
Right. So these are just important questions for you guys to think about asking when you're doing your phone interview, because this is really your only opportunity to screen this position to find out if it's going to be realistic or if it's going to be just a cluster when you get there. Because you can't go there and see how the clinic operates and run through a trial through you might be moving across the country to this job, and you don't want to get there and find out it's awful. You need to screen this on the phone interview. Ask, how does your point system work? How many patients a day do I typically see? How many starter cares a week will I typically see? How much OASIS training or ramp up time am I going to get before I'm seeing a full caseload?
Yeah.
What's the driving radius like? What's the traffic like there? Do you have other therapists on staff that I can ask questions? Or am I going to be the only PT, OT, speech therapist, etc.? So it's just good to know and some questions to ask so you don't get in a bad situation.
Yeah, and our experience, and literally talking to probably 1,000 or more travelers now in the last 4.5 years, the difference between having a good experience as a traveler and a bad experience is really how much you take things into your own hands and how good the questions that you ask are. Not only of the recruiter and the travel company you work with, how much research you do on your own, that's a big factor too. Like watching these videos, like listening to experienced travelers talk about some of the issues, and that's a big factor. But especially the interview with the facility, make sure you ask the right questions, because so many travelers will just take a job because it's in the location they want, or take a job because it's a setting they want, or take a job just because the travel recruiter says this is a position we need filled, it should be good for you, go ahead. But don't do that. Ask those questions, and that's how you have a good experience as a travel therapist.
Mandy says, are most states using the point system? As far as I know, Oklahoma has not been using it.
I think it's based on the individual home health agency, how they want to do it. Some will be a certain number of visits, some will be points, but I think those are the two main things.
Yeah, Mandy, what have you been seeing in your experience? Because this is basically, like I said, we haven't taken a full-time home health contract. We've only worked that one contract where we did a little bit of home health, and our structure for productivity was very different. But this is based on talking to fellow therapists and people coming to us for advice, or people explaining to us what they've seen. Is what we're kind of covering here.
Yep.
So,
all right. So in summary, stand up for yourself. Don't be expected to see more patients, do more work as a traveler just because we're a traveler we get paid more. That's not the reason we get paid more. The reason is because our job is difficult. We have to move around a lot. We have uncertainty. We have extra bills. That's why we get paid more, not to be a workhorse. So don't go into any clinic environment and get pushed into doing more work than the permanent staff, or seeing more difficult patients than the permanent staff, or any of that stuff. Avoid that. Stand up for yourself, and almost always if you stand up for yourself, they'll make adjustments to make it more reasonable for you, or you end up working overtime, which is also great. I've worked a ton of overtime as a traveler, and I love making the extra money, so I don't mind that. But most clinics don't want you to do that, so they'll reduce your caseload and make it more reasonable for you. But stand up for yourself no matter what setting. Usually the worst ones are going to be outpatient and skilled nursing, where you have to really ask good questions and go into it with the expectation that the permanent staff might be working more than you're working, but that we're an hourly employee, or we're hourly employees, and that we're not going to work off the clock, we're not going to be doing documentation off the clock, those kind of things.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, concerns, feel free to leave us a comment. We even go back and look later at the comments if you're watching this on the replay. Again, if you guys got any value and you learned anything tonight, we would love if you would just give us a thumbs up on the video. If you know anybody that needs to learn this information, feel free to tag them in the comments. And as always, if you guys want to send us a personal message through our Facebook page, Travel Therapy Mentor, if you need advice, if you need mentorship, if you need recommendations for which travel therapy companies and recruiters that we work with, we're always happy to talk to you guys and give you advice. You can send us a private message on Travel Therapy Mentor, or you can reach out to us via our website at traveltherapymentor.com. There's a place to contact us there. There's also a form you can fill out on there if you want recruiter recommendations.
Yep. We do these live videos every week. Something I meant to mention in the beginning of this video, but I got flustered and forgot. We're going to be at CSM this year. Any of you guys can be at CSM, the APTA CSM that is. If you are going to be, we're probably going to be doing anyone interested in travel therapy, current traveler, probably third-year students, or current therapists that are interested in travel. We're going to be doing some sort of meetup, probably a happy hour type thing, sponsored happy hour with free drinks. So Let us know if you guys are going to be there, and it'd be awesome to meet some of you guys.
All right, guys, have a great night, and we'll talk with you later.
Yep. See you next week.
Bye.